أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome to our weekly show, The Struggle Within, a show that was inspired, as we've said on the beginning of every show, the hadith that was narrated from the sixth Imam, where he narrates about the companions when they were returning back from battle and they were congratulating one another on having performed jihad, and the Prophet said, prepare yourselves now to enter the greater jihad. So when they asked him, what is this greater jihad? He said, this is the struggle against the self. As I've highlighted in previous shows as well, we've covered the definitions of what the greater jihad is. And now we're moving on to various ills or various diseases that we may harbor within ourselves that we need to tackle to be able to combat ourselves in this greater jihad. This week I'm delighted to be joined by Sister Dr. Rebecca Masterson. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for taking the time, one of the channel's favourites, as we know. This week we want to look at prejudice, an ill in our research that we've seen that has various different forms, and something that we may harbour and we may not actually know that it actually exists within us. A hadith that we've come across, again narrated from the sixth Holy Imam, and he narrates from the Prophet. He says that whosoever possesses in his heart prejudice, this is in any of its forms, this could be tribalism, racism, nationalism, even a pride upon one's religion, even to the extent of a mustard seed, God will raise him on the day of resurrection as a pagan, of an individual from the pre-Islamic era. So someone who has no faith in that sense. Sister, if we could just start with a definition of prejudice. Where does it come from? What are its roots in that sense?
I was just checking, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I was checking the root of asabiya, because it's often translated as tribalism. So it's not just prejudice, but it's also supporting one's group. And in fact, there can be good intentions in supporting one's group if that means, as the scholars say, upholding the overall principle of justice for all. Or there can be the negative side of asabiya, which is supporting one's group over and above what is just for everyone. So it means supporting one's group's interests or one's own interests against others, even if it means trampling on others' rights or oppressing others. And this is associated with tribalism because this was the system, as we know, that existed in Arabia, still does really, across many parts of the world, that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his holy progeny was trying to get rid of, because there were these cycles of vendettas, blood vendettas, prejudice against different families, and protection of one's own interests above the greater good. So this is why it's seen as so destructive and so evil, because it can break apart a society, it can give rise to bloodshed, hatred for no other reason than just that a person has a different name than you, or they're from a different group than you, and can lead to a lot of other crimes as well against others. And those crimes will be justified because one has already dehumanized the other person, and this, we can see this going all the way across the world.
I mean, I suppose we see this, if from what you as your introduction, you could say you're looking at what we see on a nationalistic level, or on a tribal level. But even individually, I suppose looking at ourselves living in the 21st century, multicultural Britain, there are so many various different groups, different people, different nationalities. And we may, I don't know, we'll come up later on in the show looking at xenophobia as such, whether, you know, these kind of fear for the other, so to speak, can transpire into this kind of prejudice. But ultimately, this could be, or having prejudice could just be an internal trait not necessarily looking on a nationalistic level, but something that where individually we just feel we may be better than others, and then that kind of transpires as, you know, a behavior, a prejudice kind of behavior or mentality, or certain statements, or even the way we interact with one another. But ultimately, I think one of the things that is the root causes of this is pride. So you have a pride within your own self, or your own achievements, or achievements from people of your own background, etc. And then that transpires in looking down at others, or deeming yourself better than others. I suppose, like, what are the roots of this? Some will suggest that, you know, this comes from a misunderstanding that, as we've mentioned in various different shows, all these different ills that we may harbour within ourselves ultimately comes down to a misunderstanding of ourselves and a misunderstanding of God. How we equate, you know, pride within our own actions, but really that's because we've misunderstood the fact that it is God who has allowed us these things, but we think it's within ourselves. So likewise, our nationality. And we see this example in the Quran, where you had with Shaitan and Nabi Adam, when he was asked to bow down to him, and his initial response was, I'm made from fire and he's made from, so I'm better. So if you can just elaborate on where this prejudice comes from in that sense.
I think that prejudice is actually something that is inculcated in our minds. That, you know, often if you see children who have not been brought up to look down on others, they're very open to other children that they meet from other backgrounds. But I guess it comes down to the human desire to excel, or to be better than others, and then hence we get society with its different levels, and people trying to climb up those levels, and different groups who have different talents, or civilizations that have flourished at one particular time, thinking that they're going to be immortal, thinking that their wealth, as Holy Quran says, you know, that the man who's been given wealth, he thinks this wealth is going to make him immortal. So that pride is kind of nurtured in a child by the family and by the social group, and the child is given messages by that social group. This is who we are, this is what we do, this is what's so great about us, and this is who they are, and this is what's bad about them, this is what is so terrible about them, we don't have anything to do with them. And this kind of constant conversation reinforces the barriers in a young person's mind, and then they grow to adulthood, and they start to become proud of the group that they are from, or the class that they are from. And as you say, the blessings that they have been given, it reminds me of another part of Holy Quran where it talks about, you know, the two men who've been given those gardens, and one of them is very proud of the garden and the wealth that he's been given, and he says, I will always have it, you know, it's never going to be taken away from me. And he attributes the blessing of the garden to himself, and he doesn't see that it's a blessing and a test from Allah, and then Allah removes it, destroys his garden for him. Strange thing about humanity is that human beings never learn this lesson. You know, you can look back in history, like Quran asks you to do, and you can see every single time that each nation or each group or each person has striven to be proud about themselves and to look down on others and to criticize others, to judge other people, often unjustly, without looking at their own faults, without seeing their own faults, and ultimately they disappear, or, you know, they're destroyed. So it is, ironically, very much like the pride of Shaitan when he was asked to bow to Adam. And often, of course, also when you have this asabiya, or this pride against other human beings, it means that you don't open your heart to what you could learn about from other human beings. So actually what ends up happening is that you become ignorant. You become an ignorant person, imprisoned by your ignorance, but proud at the same time, and unable to see how you are, beclouded, how your sight is darkened by your ignorance. So, yeah, and then that just leads on to, has a chain effect onto the next generations and friends and so on.
I wanted to look at, mentioning this story of shaitan, and the idea that, having a prejudice against others or a pride within oneself is ultimately, like we mentioned in previous shows, a misunderstanding of yourself, and a misunderstanding or a lack of knowledge of God in that sense. I mean, it's easy to say, a knowledge and understanding of God and His. I mean, we know that it's a vast subject in and of itself. But ultimately, it's the idea, it's the fundamental flaw where we misunderstand that whatever we have is from Him.
Yeah.
And whatever other people have is from Him. Everything is from Him.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if we have that penny drop, then we protect ourselves from many of these various issues. Looking again at the example of shaitan, I mean, hadith in the Quran say that he had worshipped and he was in service for 6,000 years or more. And it begs belief in the idea that in that whole period, he had failed to grasp that idea that it was all from God and not ultimately from himself. Which then led him to disbelieve or look at the good in him and ultimately think he was better than others. So just on that point that, it's a lack of understanding of our relationship with our Lord, or just a lack of understanding that everything we have is from Him. And if we knew that, or if we understood that, then, how could we be prejudiced amongst others?
I think also that it's attributing to oneself whatever blessings one has, and forgetting that could be again taken away. Allah has blessed all nations with different strengths and different weaknesses, or people with individual strengths and weaknesses, and made us all quite different. And sometimes, again, people just don't like others who are different. So rather than showing appreciation for the good aspects of someone or something that might be different, they prefer to judge what they see as just bad aspects of it being different from them, because they are right, so therefore anything that's different from them must be wrong. And also, as Quran says, that the blessings that we've been given are also that by which we are tested. And I think this is something that, again, the human being forgets so quickly, is that whatever position you've been given, whatever wealth you've been given, whatever children you've been given, that is a test from Allah of your nafs. So Allah is actually testing, okay, I'm going to give you this abundance, let's say. I'm going to give you certain skills, certain abilities. I'm going to put you in a certain situation where you can excel, you can do better than other people around you, or better than even certain members of your own family. And I'm going to see how that is going to affect your personality. And all too often, people do become proud and arrogant towards others, and actually they end up alienating other people. And as you say, this is a satanic trait. This is kind of ironic. It's in a way hidden shirk. It's praising oneself for the blessings that one has been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is a kind of form of self-worship in a sense. And So that again breaks apart humanity, like Islam came to try to unite humanity. But taking pride in oneself and praising oneself and worshipping oneself, taking oneself as a god to admire, of course leads to the fragmentation of humanity.
So, I mean, you know, looking within initially, and then, looking within the community, even if you want to go further and into society, you get this feeling that it's more common and prevalent than we actually may agree to, or and it seems like there are so many various levels. So we could be prejudiced to other people on the basis. I think the most common one is a nationality. So we will treat others differently just on the basis that they come from a different area or a different country. I mean, it's questionable on the basis that when we look at nationality specifically, these borders are not even that old.
No.
If we look at Sykes-Picot or something like that, I mean, we don't want to get too political, but these borders that we see in the Middle East are probably 100, 150 years old max.
Yeah.
But we treat one another based on these manufactured borders so differently. We'll look up at others and we'll look down at others. And I suppose one of the other ones that we see within the community as well is on the basis of lineage.
Yeah.
So, some people, I mean, I know in like subcontinent, you've had this, and it still exists, where you've got class systems, very, rigid class systems. It's not necessarily just like in the UK, where you have class systems where people cannot marry from within a lower caste, or there are some people you won't do business with them because they're from a lower caste. Or it even goes to the point that you can't touch individuals from a lower caste. So it seems like there are so many forms of this. It seems like anyone who is an other can ultimately fall prey to, a prejudice kind of mentality. But how common in your own experience do you think this is within, you could say, our communities, just looking within our own Shia communities where we have different nationalities, different colours, different races, where there is a level of prejudice?
Yeah, I mean, the thing to do with nationality is that, in a sense, the nations such as France, Germany, I mean, they didn't even exist. They were they came together over time. I mean, Germany was a kind of collection of little princedoms ruled by a bunch of different princes. So it's only over time. Italy was the same. It didn't exist as Italy as just one single nation until a couple of hundred years ago. Or my God, my date's wrong, but at least quite late. And the founding of nationalism was actually designed to support colonialism. So nations in Europe were, again, we could say, ideologically brainwashed in order to support their governments going out and colonizing other parts of the world. So they take pride in their British identity or their French identity over and above others, and inculcate themselves to believe they are superior, so that again they can justify going out and subjugating other people and treating them as less than human and dehumanizing other people. And unfortunately, this has kind of spread across the Muslim world. I mean, there have always been different groups in the Muslim world, and Britain isn't the only unique country that has different nationalities in there. It's not the only one that is multicultural. We've got different countries in the Muslim world, different regions in the Muslim world over a long period of history that were also multicultural, different people mixing together. I guess human beings have always, or Muslims have always recognized that they have certain languages and traits and customs. But today it is kind of ironic that they are judging each other based upon, like you say, these artificial boundaries, whose language is the best. You even get that in the Arabic-speaking world. Whose Arabic is best? And, you know, even within a very small region, you won't get one person from one country being allowed to marry another person from another country, or as you say, trade with that person. I mean, it was like that in England about 200 years ago. There were these very, very rigid class divisions, and you weren't allowed to marry across them. But industrialization, I guess, capitalism, changed a lot of that. You had the rise of the middle class, and it changed it. And then the First World War changed it a lot as well. But in a way, the kind of, this way of thinking that began in Europe, nationalism and this idea of class, has affected the Muslim world as well. So that, unfortunately, you know, Muslims do tend to categorize each other and judge each other based upon even, you know, the town you come from, the region you come from. And it is very serious, like you said. The one who has even a mustard grain's weight of asabiya within them will not get the scent of Jannah, you know, will die the death of Jahiliyyah. So it makes me wonder, like, what is the point? You know, if you really look at it, you may be going to your masjid, doing your nawafil, you know, doing all your fasting, giving your sadaqah, doing your charities, and wearing your hijab, you know, etc., even doing tabligh, could be doing everything, but all of that is going to be destroyed because deep down you think that the people from the area of your country or your city or your family are somehow inherently better than Muslims from another region. It's going to destroy all of that ibadah.
Before we continue with what we've prepared, I think, you know, we wouldn't be doing justice to prejudice in itself if we don't look at racism.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, especially looking at colours, skin colours and features that we see and that we judge on basis of looks.
Yeah.
You know, not necessarily intellect, not mannerisms, nothing. It's just on the basis of how an individual looks.
Yeah.
And they get treated differently. So you can have an individual, I mean, this could be, I mean, you know, you can blame society for this, you can blame the media. It's so prevalent.
Yeah.
You know, you could have an individual who is, you know, well-studied, intellectual, good person, good mannerisms, but they will be treated a certain way just on the basis of what they look like. And it's almost accepted to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So yes, okay, fine, people from within your grouping may look a certain way, etc., and others who look differently will be treated differently, but it seems like it's across the board, so within our communities as well. But within society, I mean, we know what has happened in years gone by, especially, you know, with the slave trade and things like this. But ultimately, this happens everywhere, just on the basis of, you know, just what you look like, your skin color.
Yeah.
Where people are, like you've mentioned, dehumanized.
Yeah.
How much of an issue do you think this is within our own communities, our own mosques?
I think it's actually one of the main issues that needs to be addressed, because the whole point of Islam is that someone is only superior to another person because of their taqwa, you know, their God consciousness, their piety, their humility. And, you know, Islam and being in Islam should be a refuge from everything outside of it that might give a human being pain and difficulty. So actually being within Islam should be something that gives everybody peace, because they know they can trust everybody, they know that they're not going to be judged unfairly, they're going to be appreciated as a human being, as a brother in this path or sister in this path. But what happens is that we don't gain that peace necessarily being in Islam, because you're still dealing with the same issues that one would deal with outside of Islam. So, and as you say, with regard to skin colour, it's kind of interesting because, again, if I was told about, and I've mentioned it before on previous programmes, girls who are dark-skinned not getting married, and as I was told about a sister from a family, so she had other sisters, but she had the darkest skin among them, and she was the last one to get married, and she was just married off to some kind of awful person. Her parents weren't even too bothered as to what kind of person she's marrying. The thinking was, well, she's dark, she's a bit of a reject, we'll be happy if we can just get her married to anybody. Although, as a person, she may have been better than her sisters. So that is a life ruined because she just happened to be a darker shade than her sisters. And even sometimes one is surprised by what is the definition of being dark. I mean, I've met sisters or, ladies who will say, oh, well, she's dark or I'm dark. And I'm thinking, how can you call yourself dark? So this idea of the darkness of skin as well, that is said to also have come from colonial times where, the British going out or the Europeans going out kind of established a new hierarchy where white is the best at the top. But some people have done some historical research and they say it comes even before that. And then, sadly, I think this thing gets perpetuated because then, as an example, rather than the families saying, we're going to change this and we're going to support all of our children, no matter what their skin colour, and we're going to campaign in our neighbourhood to change the thinking of our neighbourhood. Instead, what they do is that they say, well, everyone thinks that my youngest daughter's not going to get married because she's dark, and then those ideas get reinforced in that girl. So again, it's all psychological. The parents kind of give in to what they think the society thinks, and they don't give their daughter hope. They themselves don't even value her for her qualities. They themselves will tell her, well, look, bottom line is, at the end of the day, you can have 3 PhDs, you can be Hafiz Quran, you can do all your nawafil, but you're dark skinned, so, don't expect too much in life. So that's that. And then, obviously, as we know, the prejudice against each other because of, like you say, coming from different countries and grading each other according to features, according to colour of skin, and excluding some people. This can even go so far as excluding certain ulama who are black or African, excluding them or not allowing them to speak, give khutbahs in the masjid or teach the community, because it's deemed, almost humiliating. Like, we're not going to have a black person teaching us. We're not going to have an African island teaching us. That's beneath us. So this is really, and there are stories of brothers and sisters from different backgrounds literally getting excluded from the mosque, or turning up and people saying, what are you doing here? So this is, you can imagine the pain that is given to these believers. The mosque, the masjid, doesn't belong to any of us. In fact, the Holy Prophet, as we know, peace be upon him and his holy progeny, said the whole earth is a masjid. So that little building is not our property. We wouldn't even have built that building if we didn't owe something to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his holy progeny. The whole reason why we've got that masjid is because we've been fortunate enough to know about Islam and to be within Islam. And it's completely violating the message of Islam to exclude anyone from that masjid based upon their background.
want to look at this idea further. I mean, there's quite a few things that we still wish to cover, but just this idea of skin color.
Yeah.
Do you think? I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, this is not just from colonial times. It's almost as if we've been engineered,
Yeah.
socially engineered to accept what is, for example, good looking.
Yeah.
And it's just as if we've been programmed that way.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think we're going to tackle it in this 45, 50 minutes. But how do we get out of this idea? Because we may try our hardest individually to look beyond it, but when the whole of society, when the media, when you see the papers, everything going in a certain direction, and it's such a heavy tide that it's so difficult to fight against it. Where do you start? Do you know what I mean? It seems as though it's almost just something. It's just accepted. Even if you want to try and fight it, where do you start? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So you mean the idea of kind of what is acceptable in terms of looks even within the Muslim community?
Yeah, exactly. Or what is deemed, for example, good looking? Like, it's as if we've been engineered because of society, because of even, like you mentioned, the way that children or people who have a darker skin have been engineered to accept that they're not as good looking or as desirable as people who have a different type.
Yeah.
You know, you see. I remember doing on a different show, Behind the Headlines, we were looking at a story that was prevailing now amongst Pakistani men,
right?
Where out there these skin lightening creams have become so common amongst the men now, where you've got people bleaching, and you're talking about harmful chemicals, cancer and these kind of things. But it's as if the guys or the individuals who have a darker skin have accepted the fact that they've got a darker skin and are now doing something about it in that sense. So it's as if they've accepted it, and I suppose because they have accepted the repression and that kind of prejudice, it's made it okay to a certain extent.
Yeah, no, I see, definitely, you see all these creams, something like, what's it, I don't know, Light and Lovely or something. They've got titles. They've got really soft-sounding titles, but as you say, they've got these really harsh chemicals in there. And I mean, I was in Japan 20 years ago, and the youth there, although they were obviously bombed by United States, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, by the time it gets to the 1990s, the youth were trying to be American. And there was a boy at the college where I was attending who was proud about the fact that he would wear blue contact lenses. And it's kind of sad that, there's this shallow way of judging one's own worth, but also, as you say, it's an industry, and the thing about industry is that they take advantage of people's insecurities about themselves, and they're going to try and make $1 out of playing on people's insecurities. And as you say, it's like a tide. I've heard that going on also in Africa. Lots of skin whitening going on, hair straightening, adoption of certain, clothes, getting rid of the traditional clothes as well. And it's going across the world. And I guess, as you say, and it's on such a huge scale, the only thing I think we can do is to, again, work at a local level. I think that's each one of us, taking that responsibility, talking to one's own children, other people's children, speaking to the local school, writing to the MP, maybe writing to the government, perhaps even launching a campaign. And a lot of things can be fought at a legal level. So perhaps even bringing in legal restrictions on how and where these skin lightening creams can be sold, but there also needs to be a counter media going on about the beauty of every human being, no matter what they look like, trying to focus on the inner beauty of the human being. Because also this obsession with the external affects people who are disabled, as an example, might be in a wheelchair, or cerebral palsy, or just, Down syndrome, and people who just look slightly different from however they were born, and they are very socially excluded. They have difficulties getting jobs, making friends, and can become very isolated. So it's a very dangerous influence, and really we need a well-funded counter-campaign against it.
I want to bring the discussion back to our topic with regards to the hadith that we started with. There's another hadith, in fact, it's narrated in Al-Kafi again by Imam al-Sadiq, who narrates again from the Prophet, who says, the one who exerts asabiya or prejudice, the tie of faith is taken off his neck. And this is similar to the first tradition, where it says that you'll be raised as, non-Muslims, basically.
Yeah.
So again, obviously, we're looking at this idea that, even the slightest element of this prejudice can be, lead to an individual being raised up on that day without faith, or even they would live their life, they would live a faithless life.
Yeah.
If they had this within them, they wouldn't taste faith, shall we say. I want to take this further, and I want to look at the idea of, not necessarily get controversial, but I want to look at it from every sort of angle, and the idea that, can prejudice ever be, or harbouring that kind of mentality, can it ever be acceptable to a certain extent? Not necessarily acceptable, but can it be something natural? Are we naturally xenophobic, shall we say? Have we naturally got a fear for the other and a favourable mentality to our own group or ourselves or our family or our lineage? But what about the argument where you have an individual or you have a community or you have a group that are successful, as you mentioned, and you have another community who are not as successful, or who are wasteful in the opportunities that they have, who do not make the most of the opportunities that they have, purposely or for whatever reason. I mean, isn't it natural that you're going to look at them and say, you've got every potential, but you don't make any use of it?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? Or you're going to look at them and say, there's something wrong with this group.
Yeah. I mean, I think also that actually, yes, there would be that natural reaction, even on an individual basis, that a friend, you may even have a friend who has been given perhaps even more opportunities than you have, but has gone astray in a sense and, gone downhill, not going anywhere, leading a destructive life. And then you might think, well, I'm better than that person because with the few opportunities I've been given, I've done well for myself. And look at them. Or
even if you're thankful to God, but still there's that small element where you just look at them and you think, I wouldn't want to be like that.
No.
Do you know? No. It could be something so small.
Yeah.
That's the point.
I think there needs to be a wider, in order to kind of avoid that, there needs to be a wider understanding of the, again, social, economic and political reasons as to why different groups struggle more than others. And sometimes, again, I mean, and it can go back decades as to why they have ended up like that. I mean, I can say that I went on the Hajj in 2003, and I remember coming back and people saying, was it a really spiritual experience? And I said, well, it was a human experience. I saw people who had Iman, but who had been, we could say, neglected for decades, maybe even a couple of 100 years, by their own governments. So we see that now, especially when we look at the Muslim world, and this is a really shameful thing, is how countries of Muslim majority populations, the governments of those countries, invest hardly anything in education. So actually, yes, the people are uneducated, they are behaving in a rough way because their own governments have not invested in raising them up. And I think that comes down to these governments wanting to keep the people in a uneducated position so that they don't rise up against that government. I mean, I remember coming out of the Haram in Mecca, and one man ahead of me blowing his nose without a tissue. So, and just kind of wherever was the nearest place he could, and people around him, come on, what are you doing? You know, and someone gave him a tissue, and I was thinking, well, at least the people around him are trying to educate him on just basic matters of cleanliness. But I'm thinking, you know, this is not what Islam is. Islam is about cultivating the self so that one has the best akhlaq. And I feel that populations have been neglected for a long time. Perhaps certain economic situations have favoured other people, or, you know, over time, and they don't realise how they've been favoured, and so they take it for granted. Again, like, you know, the UK, there are some fantastic houses here in the UK, huge, and especially those that were built in the 19th century, massive mansions, landscape gardens, but, you know, and then one could look and say, well, look at the architecture we've got in comparison to, say, other people's architecture, which isn't as good. But those houses were funded by slaves working on sugar plantations, and those slaves were captured by force. So one can feel pleased with oneself for having a mansion and a landscape garden, but where did you get that? It was from a very well-organised form of brutality over other human beings. So there needs to be a wider understanding of how is it that this person has ended up with a low self-esteem. This is what we've got, a lot of children getting into crime or not believing they can get anywhere in life because that's been heavily inculcated into them over generations, and it's very, very hard to break that.
Yes, because we can often fall prey to just looking superficially, without taking that, as you mentioned, that moment, to reflect and understand that why are things the way they are in that sense. I want to look at, when you look at society, and a society that has accepted or where prejudice exists within that society. So when you have one group that is prejudiced against another group, it's almost as if, as a counter, you will find the group that has been, has suffered that prejudice will then be prejudiced to another group. Yeah. And it's as if it just goes...
Vicious cycle.
Yeah, exactly, where you have this trickle-down effect, and suddenly you've got every group that has got some level of prejudice to another group. So it's almost as if it's everywhere you look.
Yeah, yeah. I think, again, looking at the generations of Muslims who have grown up together, their thinking is often quite different from the previous generation. So you might feel a bit sort of sad and think that this is just going to go on forever and everyone's just going to, that person's going to hate that person because of this and vice versa. But sometimes when people live with each other, or especially young people, they have often more open hearts and actually a better sense of justice sometimes than the older generations. And they just see themselves as friends, sharing an experience together of growing up. And they don't actually relate to these very hardened prejudices that are going on in other parts of their community. And I've seen this. I've seen the huge gap between, say, a group of 16-year-olds who go into school together from different backgrounds, mixing together, and they're all friends. They just see each other as friends, sharing the same experience of growing up together. And they are miles away from these racial and cultural wars that are going on. So there's one area of hope there. And also, I think within every group, there's always going to be someone who is open-minded. There's always going to be some people who are more open-minded. And it's really about working with the people who are open-minded and to try to expand those numbers who are willing to work with each other and cross bridges. So I don't think we should ever give up hope, because there are those seeds, but they just need to be nurtured in the right way.
How does, naturally, like you've mentioned, these kind of prejudices, we're not born with them. You'll find a play group of children, 2, 3, 4 years old, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different looks and colours, etc., and they just get on with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't enter their psyche in that sense. It's the parents waiting outside to collect the children that will not converse or possibly have that prejudice with another individual. How is an individual who does harbour prejudice in that sense, how do you think they are naturally, because if our natural kind of fitra, our internal kind of the way we're hardwired is that we're not prejudiced, how do we naturally perceive an individual who displays that kind of attitude? If you're in a group and suddenly you've got an individual who just will not speak or will be rude unnecessarily to an individual who looks different or is from a different background. And this could be either way. This could be, I've seen people of colour who are very prejudiced to non-coloured people. It goes every way, but when you see it, it's how is it perceived?
Yeah, it's very difficult to break through that, but it does need to be mentioned. I mean, really, when we look over time, we can see that it is possible to change society, but that things start to slide again when we don't take action or we don't speak out. So, yeah, I mean, if someone is saying an insulting remark to somebody because they are from a different background, or as you say, if you're in a social setting, or they get patronised, or many other, kind of insulting attitudes, it is required, it is necessary, I think, to say something. But I think ideally one would really need to sit down with the person who has made that comment, not just in one, cup of tea, but it would actually require quite a lot of time to engage with that person and to help their mind to open up. So actually it takes a lot more commitment to change that way of thinking or to help people to understand that way of thinking than just, say, a seminar or something like that. And I was just actually mentioning the other day to a friend when I had come back from the Middle East in 1996, 97, and I was working in a company where the bosses were English, and my boss said to me, he complained that I'd had too many foreign influences. So he said, "You've had too many foreign influences, I'm going to make an English woman out of you yet." And I was joking about this with another Muslim sister saying, well, did he succeed? But another thing in these settings, which is quite difficult to handle, is that often these remarks get thrown out. So it's not like the underlying issues are discussed in an honest way. It's not like, well, you know, I have these phobias or I have these ideas about you and this is why I'm saying this. There isn't really an honest discussion. Usually it's just a flippant remark that's chucked out. And it requires patience. And I've spoken to colleagues who have also been on the receiving end of prejudice, and they have said that, you know, that they were quite militant at one point in reacting against this prejudice, but they've moved to a different phase of just taking it with more patience and dealing with it in a more patient way, because otherwise the person on the receiving end of that prejudice, it can eat them up. It can actually, you know, they can get so angry and so bitter that they're the one that can be destroyed. And like one of my colleagues said that, you know, there came a point where that anger is eating him up too much. So he has to come to a decision where, I'll let it go. You know, this is the way it is. I'll do my best to speak about it and raise about it where possible, but I'm not going to let it destroy me. And unfortunately, that's what prejudice can do. It can destroy the other person.
That's very true. But the point I was kind of looking at, so like, for example, this example here, where you've got your colleague who suffers from this, so you know, as the third party individual, when you see somebody being prejudiced to that person, your view of that person really shatters, it really comes down. So you end up you perceive that person because you haven't
I understand, yeah, what you're saying.
You haven't experienced that prejudice. When you see someone being prejudiced, you look at them really like your judgment or your perception of that individual naturally it falls, it shatters.
Yeah.
It's like you have a pride about something where you haven't actually done anything, and you're taking that out in a way where you're punishing another individual, really, you know? And you end up looking at them thinking, you know, I really don't want to be like that, or there's something wrong with you, or why are you so ignorant?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is another thing that, you know, people can be nice when they are not being challenged. And the interesting point comes when their boundaries are being challenged, and then you see, you know, another face. I mean, again, years ago, when I was working with another channel and had a kind of religious studies program or religious exchange program, I called in a guest. She was I think she was a member of anyway, some other kind of religious offshoot group with a kind of a Buddhist or Hindu kind of background. But she was American. She was a white American woman who was following this path. And so I spoke to her on the phone, and with my name, you know, she didn't realize, you know, my religion. So she was very friendly to me on the phone, and we had a good conversation. When she turned up at the studio and she saw me with hijab, that's when she got really nasty. She got really nasty. And I just thought to myself, you are the head of, you know, she does videos of her on YouTube giving lectures about love and acceptance and compassion. And I was thinking, you know, you're the head of this organization, you're its spiritual head, and you're giving lectures on love and compassion. But when you're faced with someone who, you know, fits into a category that you're prejudiced against, I see a very different side to your personality. Where was her love and compassion and understanding towards me? She obviously hated Islam and hated Muslims and hated the fact that a white woman like her, you know, had become Muslim. And so, as you say, I mean, it completely destroys anything else that person has got to say. It just makes it irrelevant. So again, I mean, we come back to the masjid scenario where Someone, you know, a community can be very proud of their masjid, and we've got these programs going on, and we do this and we do that. Someone from a different nationality turns up at the door and they get turned away because they are from a different nationality. That means that those people have just shown a very ugly pride and actually very ugly manners. So all of the other beautiful actions that they do are not really relevant. And it also means you can't trust that person. I mean, if someone's nice to me because I'm European and white skin is seen as better, how can I trust that if I had happened to be born black, that they're also going to be nice to me? And if I see that person, or I hear them making derogatory remarks about black believers, I'm thinking, well, supposing I had been born black, you wouldn't be then sitting here talking to me. And that has actually happened. There have been scenarios where I've had some quite nice people sitting around me, but then a remark like that comes out and I'm thinking, so supposing I had been born black, you wouldn't be sitting eating with me at the table. And then it means that you can no longer trust these people who are sitting around you.
That's a fitting end, I suppose, because that's something that, you know, really highlights just how this evil can be perceived. Ultimately, it is an evil trait that, you know, as we see in the Quran, was displayed by Iblis himself.
Yeah.
I suppose, you know, we've just got to pray that we can look beyond that, and as you mentioned, you know, generation after generation, it does filter out. But thank you once again for taking the time, and thank you to those watching at home. And inshallah, we can rid ourselves from this evil mentality and continue with the struggle within. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ahlul Bayt TV, the holy household for every household.